Why believe in God? Most people who claim to believe in Him, they haven't seen Him, at least not visibly. They haven't heard Him speak to them in an audible voice. There are some things in the universe that are difficult to produce empirical evidence for. A scientific mind, a logical mind, wants empirical evidence. We want something verifiable, something we can touch, something tangible that we can prove. How do you provide a qualitative or a quantitative definition of something like love? We could say it's a chemical process. We could observe its effect on human beings or possibly animals. But in the end, it's not necessarily something you can produce empirical evidence for. We write poems and stories and novels, and we have dances and great works of art to celebrate love. But love is at best an ambiguous topic. It is difficult to quantify, difficult to define. But I'm going to appeal to you as a logical person, to someone with a sense of reason, to simply use that sense of reason. How did the universe get here? And why are we here? Religion says that everything is created by God, and then perhaps the next question in your mind is, okay, but who created God? And why isn't God here? Why doesn't He come down and prove Himself to us every time we ask? And someone might respond, well, obviously a being such as God with a superior intellect has better things to do with his time than come down to earth and prove himself every time someone questions his existence. But that doesn't comfort us in terms of trying to satiate our desire for meaning and purpose, and to know how and why did everything get here, and why is it the way it is. Science may tell us, well, it was the Big Bang. But again, it's an incomplete answer, or it's a question that simply begs another question. If we're here because of the Big Bang, there was this singularity and it exploded and created all that we know, well, what was here before the singularity? Was the singularity always here? If so, what caused it to explode? So either way, we have questions. Our universe, we take it for granted that it's governed by certain laws of physics and mathematics. Electromagnetism, the strong and weak nuclear force that hold atoms together, gravity. All of these things make our universe possible, and without them, nothing as we know it could exist. Well, if everything was a singularity in the Big Bang, what caused these forces to separate from whatever superforce existed before these forces were? How did everything get to be the way that it is? Was it just chance? Is it possible that maybe some random probability allowed all of this to exist, including us, so that now we are, as Carl Sagan used to say, the universe trying to understand itself? Evolution teaches us that we came from inanimate matter, organic compounds, and these organic compounds came from simpler elements that were not organic. And that came basically from hydrogen, the very simplest element, one electron, one proton. Before that, well, we didn't even have what we needed for atomic structure. But let's take all of that for granted. Let's work this like a geometry postulate, and we'll allow those basic elements to be the given for the postulate. So we don't have to justify the four forces. We don't have to justify the simplest element, hydrogen, or heavier elements, inorganic compounds, organic compounds. Let's say that we have all the stuff we need, all of the compounds and all of the elements we need for a cell, for organic life. Let's take that for granted in this postulate. Are we saying that if we took those compounds and we waited billions of years and shocked it a few trillion times, or applied some kind of energy to it that allowed for random mutations, that it would arrange itself into DNA, RNA, into a living cell? Just think about it with a rational mind. Is that the most elegant solution? We have multiple explanations here. It could have been a supreme being, it could have been intelligent design, it could have been probability, random chance. But if we were to apply Occam's razor, which says given multiple explanations, generally the truest one is the simplest, the most elegant explanation, then let's take a look at that. This is a computer, something we probably take for granted in today's society. But if you look at it, it's composed of thousands of parts. The circuitry inside this laptop, they regulate the flow of electrons inside of it. And if that flow of electrons varies in amplitude or frequency in a way that it is not supposed to, this device will not function. The microprocessors and circuitry have to work just perfectly. And that's just the hardware. In addition to the hardware functioning perfectly, and according to the way it is designed, it has to have an operating system and software to interface with the user so that it can do useful things. So even though we may take it for granted, it's an obviously complex device. Using your sense of reason, there's probably no one on this planet that would look at this device and assume that it didn't have an engineer, that it didn't have a designer, that it didn't have a maker. We look at this device and its complexity, the nature of what it is and what it does, compels us to believe it was created. If not, if we don't believe that, then you're saying that I could take the raw elements that this is made from, silicon, copper, zinc, minerals, let's just say sand. And even that, we're taking that for granted, because how did those elements get here and what led to their creation or existence? But let's say we take that as a given for our little geometry postulate here, and we work our way through it. If I took these raw elements, this sand, are we saying that if we left this in a pile for billions of years, it would somehow arrange itself into this? Because that's more likely than a living thing arising from a non-living thing. We know that there are thousands of parts to a basic cell. We know that it needs mitochondria, ribosomes, a nucleus, a semi-permeable membrane that allows waste out and food in. We know that the cell has to be regulated from its nucleus by its DNA. We know that DNA itself is an enormously complex organization of molecules. And if any one thing were to go wrong, any one of 1,000 things, any one of 10,000 things were to go wrong in a cell, that cell would die. It would no longer be able to maintain homeostasis. How much more complex is one living cell than a laptop computer? Even the simplest type of what might be considered life, a virus that has RNA instead of DNA, is still an enormously complex machine. Now, the general assumption is that in evolution, animate matter, living things, came from inanimate material. And it just simply took billions of years. And so if we have organic compounds and we put them in a bowl in soup somewhere, and we shock it a few trillion times and just wait billions of years, we're going to get an arrangement or a clump of molecules that resembles a living cell. But stop and think about that for a moment. Is that really possible?